Captain Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold metal wall, listening to the alien voices echoing through the corridor. 3 days ago, she had been leading a reconnaissance mission on the outer rim planet of Kepler 442b. Now she was trapped in what appeared to be a massive underground facility, surrounded by beings she had only seen in classified military briefings. The Zenthari were tall, gray-skinned creatures with elongated limbs and large, black eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their technology was decades ahead of anything humanity possessed, and their military might had already claimed 17 human colonies in the past 2 years. Sarah had seen the aftermath firsthand during the evacuation of New Brisbane. Her rifle was gone, of course. They had taken everything except her standard-issue fatigues and dog tags. The metal corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, lit by strips of blue light that hurt her eyes. She had been walking for what felt like hours, trying to find an exit or at least another human being. The sound of footsteps made her freeze, heavy, deliberate steps that echoed with an odd metallic ring. Sarah quickly ducked behind a support beam, controlling her breathing as she had been trained. Through the shadows, she watched as 2 Zenthari guards approached, their black armor gleaming under the alien lights. They were speaking in their own language, a series of clicks and whistles that her translation implant struggled to interpret. The device had been damaged during her capture, only catching fragments of their conversation. Something about specimens and testing protocols. As the guards passed her hiding spot, Sarah noticed something that made her heart race. One of them carried what looked like a human weapon, but modified with Zenthari technology. The stock was reinforced with their signature blue metal, and strange symbols glowed along the barrel. It was clearly a sniper rifle, probably taken from one of her fallen comrades. The guards disappeared around a corner and Sarah waited several minutes before moving. She needed to find the others from her team. Sergeant Martinez had been with her when they were captured, along with Corporal Jackson and Private Williams. The last thing she remembered was a blinding flash and then waking up in a small cell that smelled of ozone and fear. Following the same direction the guards had taken, Sarah discovered that the corridor opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, while the floor was divided into sections by energy barriers. Each section contained different groups of beings, not just humans. She could see what appeared to be refugees from several different species, all looking defeated and confused. In the far corner, she spotted familiar uniforms. Her team was alive, though they looked worse for wear. Martinez had a bandage around his head and Jackson was favoring his left arm. They were sitting on the metal floor, speaking in low voices to avoid attracting attention. Sarah studied the energy barriers. They hummed with power, and she could see scorch marks on the floor where someone had obviously tried to test their strength. The barriers extended from floor to ceiling, creating perfect prison cells that required no guards to maintain. Moving carefully along the shadows at the edge of the chamber, she tried to get closer to her team. The other prisoners paid her no attention, most of them staring blankly at the walls or sleeping on the hard surface. The smell of unwashed bodies and despair filled the air. As she crept forward, a new sound made her stop cold. The rhythmic clank of military boots on metal, accompanied by voices speaking perfect English. But the accent was wrong, too precise, like someone who had learned the language from recordings rather than natural speech. A group of Zenthari officers entered the chamber, led by what was obviously a high-ranking individual. This one was taller than the others, with intricate markings carved into his gray skin and a cape that seemed to be made of some kind of energy field. His eyes were different too, not the usual black but a deep purple that seemed to glow with inner light. He was speaking to his subordinates in English, clearly for the benefit of the human prisoners. "The testing will begin tomorrow. These specimens should provide adequate data for our research into human combat capabilities. Their reputation for violence and unpredictability precedes them." The general, for that was clearly what he was, walked slowly between the energy barriers, studying the prisoners like specimens in a laboratory. When he reached Sarah's team, he stopped and smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. "Ah, the survivors from the Kepler raid. Your resistance was admirable if ultimately futile. We have studied your military records, Captain Chen. Yes, we know who you are, even if you think you are hidden in the shadows behind that support beam." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The general was looking directly at her hiding spot, his purple eyes seeming to see right through the metal beam. Slowly she stepped out into the light, keeping her hands visible and her expression neutral. Very good. I was beginning to think humans lacked basic intelligence along with military competence. The general's English was flawless, but there was something mocking in his tone. Tomorrow you will demonstrate your species' supposed prowess in combat. We have prepared some challenges that should prove most educational. The other Zenthari officers made sounds that might have been laughter. One of them held up the modified sniper rifle Sarah had seen earlier, saying something in their native tongue that made the general's smile widen. Yes, we have studied your weapons as well. Crude but effective in their limited way. We are particularly interested in your long-range combat techniques. The data suggests that some humans possess remarkable accuracy with these primitive firearms. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They wanted a demonstration, and they clearly expected her to be the one providing it. The question was whether they intended for her to survive the experience. The general turned away, his cape flowing behind him like liquid starlight. Rest well, Captain. Tomorrow you will show us why humans believe themselves to be warriors. As the Zenthari officers left the chamber, Sarah finally understood why they had been captured alive. They were not prisoners of war. They were test subjects in some kind of military research program. And tomorrow she would be expected to perform for their entertainment. She looked across at her team, catching Martinez's eye. He gave her the slightest nod, the same signal they had used during countless missions together. Whatever the aliens had planned, they would face it as soldiers. But first, she needed to find a way to reach her team and figure out exactly what kind of test awaited them in the morning. Sarah spent the night pressed against the energy barrier closest to her team, whispering plans and sharing information. The barriers prevented physical contact but allowed sound to pass through at low volumes. Martinez had been conscious during part of their transport and had seen glimpses of the facility's layout. It was enormous, possibly spanning several kilometers underground. They've been collecting prisoners for months, Jackson whispered, his injured arm wrapped in makeshift bandages torn from his uniform. Not just humans, but species from across the sector. The guards mentioned something about combat analysis and weapons testing. Williams, barely 19 and on his first off-world assignment, kept glancing nervously at the Zenthari technology visible throughout the chamber. Captain, some of the other prisoners have been here for weeks. They say the aliens make them fight each other or fight against machines. Most don't come back. Sarah studied the chamber more carefully in the dim lighting. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see evidence of previous testing. Scorch, marks on the walls, sections of flooring that had been recently replaced and what looked suspiciously like bloodstains that hadn't been completely cleaned away. The energy barriers flickered off without warning, just as artificial sunlight began to fill the chamber from hidden sources above. Zenthari guards appeared from multiple entrances, their weapons trained on the prisoners. The same general from the previous evening entered with his retinue, but now he wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor decorated with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Attention, specimens, his voice boomed through hidden speakers, amplified to painful levels. Today we begin comprehensive testing of your combat capabilities. Each species will demonstrate their natural abilities under controlled conditions. The data will be invaluable for our military research. The guards began separating prisoners into groups by species. Sarah found herself reunited with her team, but isolated from the other humans in the facility. They were herded through a series of corridors until they reached what could only be described as an arena. The space was massive, easily the size of 3 football fields. The floor was covered in a variety of terrain types, from rocky outcroppings to dense vegetation that looked suspiciously Earth-like. Observation platforms ringed the upper levels, already filled with Zenthari officers and what appeared to be scientists carrying recording equipment. In the center of the arena stood a table displaying various weapons. Sarah recognized most of them as human military equipment, but like the rifle she had seen earlier, all had been modified with Zenthari technology. The weapons seemed to glow with inner light, and she suspected the modifications were not improvements. The general's voice echoed from speakers positioned around the arena. Captain Chen, you will select one weapon and demonstrate human long-range combat techniques. Your targets will be revealed momentarily." As he spoke, sections of the arena floor began to rise, creating elevated platforms at varying distances. On each platform, a figure appeared. Sarah's stomach dropped as she realized they were not practice targets or machines. They were prisoners from other species, each one restrained but clearly alive and terrified. You will eliminate each target, in sequence, beginning with the closest and proceeding to the most distant. The final target is positioned at a range of 2 kilometers, which our analysis suggests is beyond human capability. You have 30 minutes to complete the exercise. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "I won't murder innocent prisoners for your entertainment." The general's laugh echoed through the arena, a sound like grinding metal. "Admirable sentiment, but impractical. If you refuse to participate, we will simply execute all targets simultaneously, along with your team members. If you miss any target, the remaining prisoners will be killed slowly and painfully. However, if you successfully eliminate all targets, we will release the surviving prisoners and provide your team with improved living conditions." The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Sarah could refuse and watch everyone die, or she could participate and at least give the other prisoners a quick death while potentially saving her team. But there was something about the general's tone that suggested this was not the whole truth. She approached the weapon table, studying each option carefully. The rifles had been modified with Zenthari targeting systems that would make accurate shooting nearly impossible for someone unfamiliar with their operation. The scopes were calibrated for alien vision, and the triggers had been adjusted to require significantly more pressure than human weapons. But there, at the end of the table, was her own rifle. The weapon she had carried through a dozen missions, customized to her exact specifications and maintained with obsessive care. It had been modified like the others, but she could see that the Zenthari had tried to preserve its basic functionality while adding their own technology. "Interesting choice," the general commented as Sarah picked up her rifle. "We wondered if human attachment to specific weapons was merely superstition, or if it provided actual combat advantages. This will be most educational." Sarah examined the weapon carefully. The Zenthari modifications were extensive, but they seemed designed to monitor and record rather than hinder. The scope had been replaced with something that looked like it belonged on a starship, and the barrel was wrapped in sensors that probably measured everything from muzzle velocity to barrel temperature. The rifle felt wrong in her hands. The balance was off, the weight distribution changed by the alien technology, but underneath the modifications, it was still her weapon. She could work with this. Looking out at the targets, Sarah began calculating distances and wind patterns. The artificial atmosphere in the arena was still, but she could see subtle air currents from the ventilation systems that would affect bullet trajectory at longer ranges. The first target was perhaps 400 meters away, well within normal range. The final target, at 2 kilometers, would be challenging even under ideal conditions. What troubled her more was the setup itself. This was not just a test of marksmanship. The Zenthari were studying human psychology as much as human combat skills. They wanted to see how humans reacted to impossible choices, how they handled moral pressure, and whether they could maintain accuracy under extreme stress. The general's voice cut through her thoughts. "You may begin when ready, Captain. Remember, any hesitation will result in additional casualties." Sarah raised the rifle and looked through the modified scope. The Zenthari technology was actually impressive, providing information about distance, wind speed, and even the heart rate of the target. But it was also designed for alien physiology, and the display was almost overwhelming in its complexity. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the weapon, listening to the subtle sounds of the arena. This was what they wanted to see. Whether humans could perform under pressure, whether their reputation for adaptability and determination was justified. When she opened her eyes, Sarah had made her decision. She would play their game, but not by their rules. The general had underestimated one crucial factor about human nature. Sometimes the only way to win was to change the game entirely. "I'm ready," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the arena. The Zenthari officers leaned forward in anticipation, their recording equipment focused on her every move. What they didn't know was that Sarah Chen had not earned her reputation as one of humanity's finest snipers by following conventional tactics. She had survived 17 major engagements by thinking 3 steps ahead of her enemies and finding solutions they never saw coming. The general was about to learn that humans were far more dangerous than his research had suggested. Sarah adjusted her stance, feeling the modified rifle settle into the familiar position against her shoulder. The Zenthari modifications made the weapon heavier, but the balance was not impossible to work with. She had trained with damaged and improvised equipment during survival exercises. This was just another variable to overcome. The first target was a humanoid creature she didn't recognize, with pale blue skin and large eyes that reminded her of Earth's dolphins. It was restrained to a metal post on a platform 400 meters away, well within her normal engagement range. Through the alien scope, she could see its chest rising and falling rapidly with obvious terror. Sarah pushed down the revulsion she felt at being forced into this position. The general had made the stakes clear. If she missed, everyone would die slowly. If she refused, everyone would die immediately. The only path forward was through precise execution and hope that her developing plan would work. She studied the scope display, trying to understand the alien readouts. Most of the information was incomprehensible, but she could identify basic range and wind data. The Zenthari had over-engineered their targeting system, providing far more information than any shooter could process effectively. It was designed to overwhelm rather than assist. Ignoring most of the display, Sarah focused on the fundamentals. Her instructors had drilled into her during sniper training: breath control, trigger squeeze, sight alignment, and follow-through. The modified trigger required significantly more pressure than she was used to, but she could adapt. The arena fell silent, except for the hum of alien technology and the distant sound of ventilation systems. In the observation galleries, dozens of Zenthari officers waited with their recording equipment, expecting to witness the limits of human capability. Sarah's finger found the trigger. The crosshairs settled on the target's center mass. She took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar force, but the sound was wrong. The Zenthari modifications had changed the weapon's acoustic signature, creating a sharp crack that echoed strangely in the artificial atmosphere. Through the scope, she watched the target collapse immediately, the shot precise and clean. A murmur ran through the observation galleries. The general's voice carried a note of interest that hadn't been there before. Adequate accuracy at close range. Proceed to the second target. The second platform was 800 meters away, at the edge of what most military organizations considered effective rifle range. The target was another species she didn't recognize, covered in what looked like natural armor plating. The restraints held it in place, but she could see it struggling against the bonds. Sarah worked the rifle's bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. The action felt sluggish, probably another modification designed to slow her rate of fire and increase the psychological pressure. Every second of delay increased the suffering of both the targets and her watching team members. Through the scope, she studied the armored target more carefully. The Zenthari had chosen their prisoners specifically to create different challenges. This creature's natural armor would require precise shot placement to ensure a quick death. Sarah adjusted her aim point, selecting a gap in the plating near what appeared to be the neck area. The shot was clean, the target dropping instantly. Another murmur from the galleries, this one carrying a different tone. The Zenthari were beginning to realize that their intelligence about human capabilities might be incomplete. Impressive, the general admitted, though his tone remained condescending. Perhaps humans are marginally more competent than our initial assessment suggested. Continue to the third target. The third platform stood at 1,200 meters, approaching the limits of conventional sniper engagement. The target was clearly from a species adapted to high-gravity worlds with a thick muscular build and what appeared to be redundant organs. A killing shot would require perfect placement. As Sarah prepared for the third shot, she began implementing the plan that had been forming since she first saw the arena layout. The Zenthari were so focused on their test that they had missed several critical details about the arena's design. Details that a trained sniper would notice immediately. She had been studying the observation galleries between shots, identifying the positions of key personnel, and noting the locations of what appeared to be critical systems. The arena's control center was visible through reinforced windows on the upper level, and she could see the general's command post marked by its elaborate decorations and array of monitoring equipment. More importantly, she had spotted the arena's main power distribution node, a massive cylindrical structure that fed energy to the containment systems, lighting, and defensive barriers. It was heavily armored, but armor was designed to stop frontal attacks, not precisely placed shots from carefully calculated angles. Sarah lined up the third shot, her breathing steady and controlled. The target was difficult to see clearly at this range, even with the enhanced alien optics. She could make out the general shape and the restraint system, but fine details were lost in the atmospheric distortion. The rifle cracked again and the target fell. This time the silence in the observation galleries stretched longer. The general's voice, when it came, carried a new edge of respect mixed with suspicion. Remarkable. 3 consecutive hits at increasing ranges. Our projections indicated a significant probability of failure by this point. There was a pause, filled with the sound of rapid conversation in the Zinthari language. However, the true test begins now. Target 4 is positioned at 1,500 meters beyond the effective range of your primitive weapons. Sarah could see the 4th platform through the scope, a tiny speck in the distance. At this range, atmospheric conditions, minute variations in ammunition, and even the rotation of the planet could affect bullet trajectory. It would be a difficult shot under any circumstances, made nearly impossible by the modifications to her rifle. But she was no longer thinking about the targets. Her plan required 3 more shots, and only one of them needed to hit the intended mark. The question was whether she could execute her strategy before the Zinthari realized what she was actually doing. She chambered another round and raised the rifle. In the observation galleries, recording equipment focused on her every movement. The general and his staff expected to witness the failure of human marksmanship, the point where their physical limitations would overcome their determination. They were about to learn that humans had not earned their reputation as warriors through superior physical capabilities alone. Sarah Chen had spent years training not just as a marksman, but as a tactical thinker. She could see patterns and possibilities that others missed, find solutions where others saw only obstacles. The 4th shot rang out across the arena. In the moment between the muzzle flash and the impact, Sarah was already calculating the angle and trajectory for her next target. The one that would change everything. The Zinthari were so busy watching their test subjects that they had forgotten the first rule of dealing with humans in combat situations. Never underestimate their capacity for turning defense into attack, for finding ways to fight back even when surrounded and outgunned. The general was about to receive a very painful education in human tactical thinking. The 4th shot had found its mark, though Sarah could barely see the result at 1,500 meters. The silence from the observation galleries was profound now, broken only by rapid exchanges in the Zinthari language. She could hear the disbelief in their voices, the scrambling to recalculate their understanding of human capabilities. Through her peripheral vision, Sarah watched her team members. Martinez had positioned himself where he could see both her and the observation galleries, ready to relay any intelligence about alien reactions. Jackson was studying the arena's exit points, despite his injured arm. Even young Williams was alert and focused, no longer the frightened recruit who had been captured 3 days ago. They understood that something was happening beyond a simple marksmanship test. Their captain was planning something, and they were ready to support whatever she had in mind. The general's voice carried a note of genuine surprise. 4 consecutive hits, this exceeds our projections by a significant margin. Captain Chen, your species continues to surprise us. There was a pause. Then the tone shifted to something more calculating. Target 5 is positioned at 1,800 meters. At this range, even our own marksmen would find accuracy challenging. Sarah could barely make out the 5th platform through the scope. The target was a tiny dark speck against the artificial horizon, wavering in the heat distortion from the arena's environmental systems. This shot would require her to account for factors that existed at the very edge of ballistic possibility. But she had been studying more than just the targets. Between each shot, She had been memorizing the positions of critical systems throughout the arena. The main power distribution node was located 700 meters to her left, an easy shot under normal circumstances. The control room where the general stood was 1,100 meters away and slightly elevated, protected by reinforced transparent aluminum that could probably stop conventional weapons. More importantly, she had identified what appeared to be the facility's main computer core, visible through an observation window in the arena's upper levels. It was positioned at an angle that would require a ricochet shot off the arena's polished metal walls, but the physics were achievable if she could calculate the angles correctly. Sarah raised the rifle for the fifth shot. The weapon felt different now, the alien modifications beginning to make sense as she adapted to their quirks. The trigger still required excessive pressure, but she had learned to compensate. The scope's overwhelming display of information was becoming useful as she figured out which readouts actually mattered. At 1,800 meters, wind became a critical factor. The arena's ventilation systems created subtle air currents that could deflect a bullet by several centimeters. She could see the movement of dust motes in the artificial atmosphere, feel the slight changes in air pressure against her skin. The crosshairs settled on the distant target. Sarah's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times on ranges across human space. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, steady and controlled. The rifle became an extension of her will, as familiar as her own hands despite the alien modifications. The shot echoed across the arena like thunder. Through the scope, she watched the tiny figure collapse at the impossible range. The silence from the observation galleries was complete now, broken only by the hum of recording equipment working frantically to document what they had witnessed. The general's voice, when it came, was different. The condescending tone was gone, replaced by something approaching respect. Remarkable. 5 consecutive hits at ranges that challenge the theoretical limits of your weapons technology. We will need to revise our assessment of human combat capabilities significantly. Sarah could hear excited conversations breaking out among the Zenthari officers. They were realizing that their intelligence about human military potential had been seriously flawed. If one human could demonstrate this level of precision under stress, what did that mean for humanity's capabilities as a whole? However, the general continued, the final test will determine whether this performance is exceptional skill or merely statistical anomaly. Target 6 is positioned at the maximum theoretical range for your weapon system. 2 kilometers with atmospheric interference and gravitational variables that make accuracy nearly impossible. Through the scope, Sarah couldn't even see the final platform clearly. It existed at the very edge of visual detection, a theoretical target more than a practical one. No human had ever successfully engaged an enemy at this range under combat conditions. The physics were barely possible even with perfect conditions and unlimited time for calculation. But Sarah was no longer thinking about completing the test as designed. Her plan required one final shot, but not at the distant target the general expected. She had identified her real objective, and it was much closer than 2 kilometers. As she raised the rifle for what the Zenthari believed would be her final attempt, Sarah caught Martinez's eye. He saw something in her expression and gave the slightest nod. Whatever was about to happen, her team would be ready. The general and his officers leaned forward in anticipation, expecting to witness the failure that would confirm their theories about human limitations. Their recording equipment focused on her every movement, documenting what they assumed would be the end of the demonstration. They had made a critical error in their assessment. They saw the test as a measure of human marksmanship capability, but Sarah had recognized it for what it really was. An intelligence-gathering operation designed to measure human psychological responses under extreme stress, as well as physical capabilities. More importantly, they had given her a weapon and placed her in a position where she could study their entire facility. They had assumed that desperation and moral pressure would limit her thinking to the immediate challenge of the targets they had provided. The Zenthari were about to learn that humans were most dangerous when they appeared to be trapped and helpless. Sarah Chen had been planning her real shot since the moment she entered the arena, and it had nothing to do with the targets they expected her to engage. The rifle settled into position one final time. Through the scope, she could see the general clearly in his observation post, surrounded by his staff and their precious recording equipment. He was smiling, anticipating the human failure that would confirm his species' superiority. Sarah's finger found the trigger. Her breathing stopped. The crosshairs aligned with perfect precision on a target the general would never see coming. The Zenthari had made one final, fatal mistake. They had assumed that a human sniper would think like a Zenthari sniper, limited by conventional tactics and predictable strategies. They were about to discover that the most dangerous thing about humans was not their physical capabilities, but their refusal to accept that any situation was hopeless. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, but her aim was not directed at the distant platform where the sixth target waited. Instead, she had calculated a shot that would require every skill she had developed over years of training and combat experience. The main power distribution node stood 700 meters to her left, its armored surface gleaming under the arena's artificial lighting. The Zenthari had designed it to withstand direct assault, with overlapping defensive plates that could deflect conventional weapons. But armor was designed to stop attacks from predictable angles, not from a sniper who understood the principles of deflection and ricochet. Sarah had identified a critical weakness in the node's design. A small access port, probably for maintenance, drones, was positioned at an angle that would be exposed if she could bounce her shot off the arena's polished metal wall at precisely the right trajectory. The physics were complex, requiring her to calculate not just the initial trajectory, but the angle of reflection and the final impact point. The shot would require her to hit a target the size of a dinner plate at 700 meters, using a ricochet off a surface 800 meters away. Under normal circumstances, it would be nearly impossible. With a modified alien weapon she had never used before, it should have been completely hopeless. But Sarah Chen had not earned her reputation by accepting the limitations others placed on her. She had always found ways to achieve the impossible, to solve problems that conventional thinking said could not be solved. The general's voice echoed across the arena, impatient now. "Captain Chen, you are wasting time. The final target awaits. Demonstrate your species' limitations so we can conclude this exercise." Sarah ignored him, making final adjustments to her aim. The angle had to be perfect, too high, and the bullet would sail harmlessly over the power node. Too low, and it would impact the arena floor without reaching the target. The margin for error was measured in fractions of degrees. Through the scope, she could see the reflection point on the arena wall, a section of polished metal that would serve as her mirror. The surface was smooth enough to maintain the bullet's velocity and trajectory, angled correctly to redirect the shot toward her real target. In the observation galleries, she could see the Zenthari officers growing restless. They expected her to fire at the distant platform, to attempt the impossible shot that would demonstrate human limitations. Some were already preparing to end the exercise, having gathered sufficient data about human marksmanship capabilities. None of them were watching the power distribution node. None of them had considered that a human might ignore their carefully designed test in favor of a completely different objective. Sarah's breathing slowed to nothing. Her heartbeat seemed to pause. The rifle became an extension of her will, every part of her being focused on this single moment. She had one shot to change everything, one opportunity to turn the Zenthari's own arrogance against them. The trigger broke cleanly under her finger. The bullet left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, its trajectory calculated to perfection. It crossed the arena in a fraction of a second, struck the polished wall at the exact angle Sarah had calculated, and ricocheted toward the power distribution node. The access port was small, barely visible even through her scope. But Sarah's shot was true. The bullet found the opening and penetrated into the node's critical systems. For a moment, nothing happened. The arena remained brightly lit. The energy barriers continued to hum with power, and the general's voice began to rise in angry confusion about her failure to target the designated platform. Then the lights went out. The power distribution node erupted in a shower of sparks and alien energy discharges. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the facility, but the main power grid was failing cascade style as systems overloaded and shut down in sequence. More importantly, the energy barriers containing the prisoners vanished. The containment fields that had held dozens of species captive simply winked out of existence as their power source died. The arena plunged into chaos. In the observation gallery, Zenthari officers scrambled to understand what had happened. Emergency alarms began wailing throughout the facility, their alien tones creating a discordant symphony of panic and confusion. But Sarah was no longer paying attention to the confusion around her. She was already moving, her rifle trained on the general's observation post. Through the scope, she could see him clearly as emergency lighting cast strange shadows across his alien features. His purple eyes were wide with shock and disbelief. Impossible. His voice echoed through speakers that flickered with power fluctuations. The target was at 2 kilometers. You fired in the wrong direction entirely. Sarah's voice carried clearly across the darkened arena, amplified by the sudden silence as systems throughout the facility shut down. I never missed, General. I just wasn't aiming where you thought I was. The observation post's reinforced windows were designed to stop conventional weapons, but they had not been designed to withstand a shot from a human sniper rifle at close range. Sarah's next bullet shattered the transparent aluminum-like glass, sending fragments cascading down onto the arena floor. The general stumbled backward, his ceremonial armor suddenly seeming fragile and inadequate. Around him, his officers were shouting orders in their own language, trying to coordinate a response to a situation they had never anticipated. You cannot escape. The general's voice had lost its confidence, filtered through failing speakers. This facility spans kilometers. Our forces will recapture you within hours. Sarah smiled, though he could not see her expression in the dim emergency lighting. Who said anything about escaping? Around the arena, freed prisoners were rising to their feet. Dozens of species that had been held captive, tested and tortured by the Zenthari were now free and very, very angry. They had weapons training from their own military traditions, and they outnumbered the guards by 10 to 1. More importantly, Sarah's team was moving. Martinez had located the weapons storage area that had been sealed behind energy barriers. Jackson was helping organize the other human prisoners who had been brought in over the past weeks. Williams was doing exactly what she had trained him to do, following orders and supporting his unit. The general had designed his test to measure human limitations. Instead, he had demonstrated something far more dangerous. He had shown that humans could not only exceed the boundaries others set for them, but that they could completely redefine the parameters of engagement. Sarah's shot had done more than disable a power system. It had turned a controlled experiment into a full-scale prisoner uprising, transforming captured specimens into an army of very motivated enemies. The general was about to learn that the most dangerous human characteristic was not marksmanship or physical capability. It was their refusal to accept defeat, their capacity to turn any situation into an opportunity for victory. The base had indeed fallen silent, but not in the way the general had expected. The facility shook as explosions echoed through the corridors beyond the arena. Freed prisoners had found the weapons storage areas and were settling scores with their former captors. The careful order of the Zenthari research station was collapsing into chaos as dozens of angry species fought back against months or years of captivity and experimentation. Sarah kept her rifle, trained on the general's observation post, watching as emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the scene. The general himself had disappeared into the depths of his command center, but she could hear his voice over the failing communication systems, shouting orders in increasingly desperate tones. Martinez appeared at her side, carrying an armload of human weapons recovered from the storage areas. Captain, we've secured the immediate area. Jackson's organizing the others, and Williams found what looks like a communications room. Half the facility's computer systems are down from your power shot. Sarah accepted her sidearm and ammunition, never taking her eyes off the observation galleries. Status on our people? All accounted for. Some injuries, but nothing critical. The other prisoners are handling most of the fighting. Martinez grinned in the dim light. Turns out a lot of them have military backgrounds too. The Zenthari really didn't think this through. The irony was not lost on Sarah. The aliens had collected the finest warriors and military personnel from across their conquered territories, then kept them all in one location with inadequate security. They had been so confident in their technological superiority that they had ignored basic principles of prisoner management. A new voice cut through the emergency announcements. Speaking accented but clear English. Captain Chen, this is Commander Vex of the Rigelian Defense Force. My people owe you a debt for this liberation. What are your orders? Sarah looked up to see a tall insectoid being in the remains of a military uniform, flanked by several others of his species. They had armed themselves with Xanthari weapons and moved with the discipline of professional soldiers. Secure the facility's main computer core and communication center. We need intelligence about Xanthari operations and a way to contact our respective governments. Sarah paused, considering their options. Also, find their ship bays. We'll need transportation off this rock. Commander Vex's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. Already in progress. My people located the command center 20 minutes ago. The Xanthari made the mistake of keeping detailed records of their experiments and military intelligence. This facility contains strategic information that could shift the balance of power in this sector. The implications were staggering. What had begun as a rescue mission was becoming an intelligence coup that could change the course of the war. The Xanthari had not just underestimated human capabilities. They had handed their enemies the keys to their entire military strategy. Explosions continued to echo through the facility as freed prisoners systematically destroyed research equipment and eliminated guard posts. The Xanthari forces, designed to handle compliant test subjects, were completely unprepared for organized military resistance from multiple species working in coordination. Jackson's voice crackled over a captured communication device. Captain, we've got the main computer core secured. You need to see this data. The Xanthari have been planning something called Final Solution Protocol for inhabited systems in this sector. Sarah felt ice in her veins. She had seen Xanthari tactics on conquered worlds, but the term final solution suggested something far worse than conventional occupation. Details, Corporal. It's a systematic extermination plan, ma'am. They're not just conquering colonies. They're planning to eliminate entire species they consider incompatible with their expansion goals. Humans are at the top of the list. The general's voice suddenly boomed through the facility's speakers, the transmission clearer now as technicians restored power to critical systems. Attention, escaped specimens. This facility is surrounded by orbital defense platforms and a full battle fleet. Surrender now, and you will be returned to your cells unharmed. Continue this rebellion, and we will glass this entire moon from orbit. Sarah exchanged glances with Martinez and Commander Vex. The threat was probably real, but it revealed something important about Xanthari thinking. They still believed this was a containment situation, rather than a complete intelligence disaster. Commander Vex, how much of their database have your people accessed? Approximately 60% downloaded to portable storage. Complete fleet positions, supply lines, research data, and command structure intelligence. This information could allow the coalition species to coordinate their resistance efforts effectively for the first time. Sarah made her decision. Continue the download. Martinez, get our people to the ship bays. Williams, patch me through to the General's communication system. When the connection was established, Sarah's voice carried clearly through the facility. General, this is Captain Chen. I believe you wanted to learn about human combat capabilities. The General's response was immediate, his voice tight with fury. You have accomplished nothing except delaying the inevitable. This facility represents less than 1% of our research capacity. Your rebellion will be a footnote in our records. You're right about one thing, Sarah replied. This is about research, but not yours. She gestured to Commander Vex, who held up a data storage device containing the downloaded intelligence. For the past hour, we've been conducting our own research into Xanthari military capabilities, fleet positions, and strategic plans. Turns out you keep excellent records. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah could almost hear the General's realization of what had just happened. They had not just lost a research facility. They had handed their enemies a complete intelligence package that would reshape the entire war. When the General spoke again, his voice carried a note of desperation that had not been there before. Impossible. Our security protocols are impenetrable. No inferior species could access our strategic databases. Commander Vex's mandibles clicked with what was definitely amusement now. Your security protocols were designed to keep prisoners in cells, not to stop motivated intelligence operatives with technical expertise. My people have been cryptographers and data specialists for centuries before your species left its homeworld. Sarah checked her chronometer. They had been fighting for less than 2 hours, but the situation had completely reversed. General, you made one critical error in your assessment of human capabilities. You thought in terms of individual performance, but humans are most dangerous when we work with others. We build alliances, share knowledge, and coordinate strategies across species lines. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly. Freed prisoners had located and secured 3 Xanthari transport ships, while technical specialists continued downloading critical data from the facility's computers. What had begun as a desperate escape was becoming an organized intelligence operation. Williams appeared at Sarah's side, his young face grim with new understanding. "Captain, the final data downloads are complete. The intelligence package includes not just military information, but research into biological weapons designed specifically for coalition species. This information could save millions of lives." Sarah nodded, then spoke once more into the communication system. "General, you wanted to test human limitations. Instead, you've learned something important about human nature. We don't accept limitations. We find ways around them, through them, or over them. And when we can't overcome obstacles alone, we find allies who can help us achieve the impossible." The last transport was ready for departure. Freed prisoners from dozens of species were working together with the efficiency of a professional military unit, their shared experience of captivity having forged instant bonds of trust and cooperation. As Sarah boarded the transport, she heard the general's final transmission. His voice carried the weight of a species facing strategic disaster. "This changes nothing. We will adapt. We will overcome this setback." Sarah smiled as the transport lifted off from the facility, carrying escaped prisoners and intelligence that would reshape the war. "No, General. You'll try to adapt. But humans and our allies have been adapting longer, faster, and more creatively than you can imagine. This was never about marksmanship. It was about what happens when you underestimate the ingenuity of determined beings fighting for their freedom." The Xanthari facility fell behind them, its lights fading into the darkness of the alien moon. But the intelligence they carried would shine a light on Xanthari plans across the galaxy, giving the coalition forces their first real chance at victory. The general had laughed and said she would miss. Instead, her shot had found the target that mattered most, and the sound of its impact would echo through the corridors of power on both sides of the war for years to come.